Welcome to Movie Oubliette, the film review podcast for movies that most people have mercifully forgotten.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Conrad, and in each episode, we drag a forsaken film out of the oubliette,
Discuss it and judge it to decide whether it should be set free
or whether it should be thrown back and consigned to oblivion forever.
We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie oubliette.
Hello, listeners. You're tuning into Movie Oubliette, a podcast reviewing forgotten films with me, Dan, down in the Southern Hemisphere in Melbourne, Australia.
And me, Conrad, up in the Northern Hemisphere in Cambridge, UK.
So we'll be mainly discussing fantastical cinema, so horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, because we just love creaky doors, pew-pews, and sword clangs. Conrad, how are you today?
I'm very well. I'm very excited and happy for numerous reasons. Primarily because last night I went to the Royal Albert Hall to see a concert of John Williams music.
Ooh.
It was meant to be conducted by the man himself, but unfortunately he was taken ill, so he wasn't there in person, sadly, but he was listening in from his hospital bed, we understand. So we were all cheering him on and wishing him a speedy recovery from the Royal Albert Hall. So, but yeah, it was a magical night with the London Symphony Orchestra, and they played all the hits.
Yes.
Jurassic Park and Superman and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Schindler's List. It was, really good.
Any standout performances?
Well, they had fun in the encore and they decided to come back and play one more hit, and the conductor just signaled to the percussion that he wanted them to rumble, and then he pointed at the cello and they just went ba-dum.
Wow.
And the whole of the Albert Hall went wild.
Oh my God.
And then we got the Jaws theme tune, which is not the most complicated theme for the London Symph to play. Two alternating notes getting progressively loud. Yeah. But they did it with gusto and everyone clapped and cheered along. So, it was quite a fun evening. It was really good.
Wow, it sounds amazing.
How about yourself?
Yes, I've been doing well. My wife at the moment is going through a plastic-free... It's not a stage, it's a lifestyle choice. So we're reducing plastic and packaging. So she spends most of her weekends going around to about 8 different stores, buying things, bringing her own containers and jars and stuff. But I think it's a good choice. I feel like single-use plastics is the bane of our existence at the moment, and we should stop it now.
Yeah, this is when you discover just where there's just plastic everywhere.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
almost impossible to avoid it. So no buying new DVDs that are shrink-wrapped for you then?
Well, I mean, I think my wife is 100% into this thing, whereas I'm maybe at 80% there. So every so often I buy something that I know has packaging and I have to hide it from her, or eat the snack secretly in the corner and hide my evidence. But yeah.
So there's lots of single-use plastic stuck down the side of the sofa now.
Yeah, I've got a trapdoor that I'm just hoarding all these plastic packaging.
Well, speaking of trapdoors, he says in a very smooth segue, is it time to visit the oubliette and to find a film for us to discuss today?
It surely is. Yes, I will do the honors today.
Marvellous.
Okay, over by the oubliette. Oh, well, they're quite bitey today, aren't they? Okay, I got it.
You've stolen my funds.
All right, so I have the film with me, and I also have a very special guest.
Yes, our special guest today is a writer-director. He's the man behind the Crazy in Love segment of the horror anthology The Signal, the Amateur Night segment of VHS, and made his feature debut with a film I really enjoyed and was very excited about when I caught up with it earlier this year, The Ritual. We're very excited to welcome David Bruckner.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It's very exciting to have you here. Now, you chose the movie that we'll be discussing today, so perhaps you could tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so I don't know what the title is across the world in various markets, but in the United States, it's known as Cemetery Man. And the movie was directed by Michele Soavi, I believe that's the right pronunciation, and in 1994. And this, for me, is a movie that I watched a lot with kind of my group in college. It was just something that we would put on late at night, and it felt like an odd discovery. It was sort of, no one in our world had really seen it or heard of it. And so I probably watched this movie 10, 15 times in college. Like, I remember it pretty well. It's pretty embedded in there, and it's probably accidentally formative for me in the way I think about lots of movies. But I hadn't seen it in maybe 15, 16 years. You know, it was just something that's kind of back there bouncing around in the synapses. And so when we started talking and you guys asked the question, you know, what's a movie that you feel has been forgotten? And, you know, in my world, it instantly came to mind, and I thought I owed it another watch. So it was an absolute joy to put the movie on and watch it for the first time in a long time. And I've spent a lot of time with movies and horror cinema since then, so a lot of the things in the movie have different meanings to me now, or I understand them in a different context in terms of the genre. But also, I'm just astonished at how insane the movie is. And sometimes I feel modern films don't take the same flavored risks that movies used to, and on a whole different fronts, both in the visual style and what it takes on, and how much they embrace the symbolic nature of it. But I would describe this in short as something of a batshit Italian giallo, high art zombie movie meets screwball comedy meets existential meditation on love and death. Beyond that, I think it's fair game what any of us want to say about it. I think this movie is also probably a bit of a Rorschach, so I would say everybody's going to have a different interpretation. Yeah, how would one summarize the plot if they had to?
Okay, so
Do you want to have a go down?
I have a plot synopsis that I've written out. So Cemetery Man centers around Francesco Della Morte, a cemetery caretaker who has to deal with the dead coming back to life as zombies with the help of his slow-witted assistant Nagi. Like you said, so many things happen in the movie that are almost pointless. Francesco falls in love with a widow who continues to die but returns as entirely different characters played by the same actress, tormenting his lovesick obsession. And Nagi falls in love with the mayor's daughter's reanimated severed head. A fatal busload of Boy Scouts returns from the dead. Death pops in to say hello, and all the while Francesco slowly descends into madness and starts casually killing the living, culminating in a surreal and almost nonsensical conclusion. So that's what I have anyway.
Well put. Well put.
Yeah, that's a very courageous attempt at summarizing the plot of this plotless movie. So let's take a break and come back and discuss it some more.
Can't wait.
And we're back to discuss Cemetery Man with writer-director David Bruckner, who dragged it biting and clawing from the oubliette. I'd never seen this one before. Dan, had you seen it before?
No, I've never seen this movie before either. I'm always on the lookout for really obscure, ridiculous movies, so it's been on my radar for a while. But no, it's I've never seen it. And also Rupert Everett I only know him from My Best Friend's Wedding.
Right.
where he just plays the lovable gay best friend. So yeah, pretty shocking to see him in this.
I should say that I guess the Italian title is Della Morte dell'Amore, which has a different vibe than Cemetery Man. It's just kind of occurring to me that it was like, I think when I heard it titled Cemetery Man, it started with a laugh.
Yes.
So I'm always interested in what the, if you knew the title in a different way. Della Morte dell'Amore seems to take itself a little more seriously, but maybe not.
Oh, for sure.
Well, that's certainly what it's called here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it was only just released on Blu-ray by Shameless, which is a label that specializes in rare and extreme cinema. So yeah, HD for the first time, which was quite exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah, so Della Morte dell'Amore, it's based on a novel by Tiziano Sclavi. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but he's most famous in Italy, certainly, for creating a series of horror comics called Dylan Dog, about a paranormal investigator. And the title character, Dylan, is visually very much based on the appearance of Rupert Everett. So when Michele Soavi came to adapt Della Morte dell'Amore into a feature, they very much wanted Rupert to be involved. And I think this was before My Best Friend's Wedding, so I think that Rupert wasn't as famous or as busy, shall we say. Yeah, and he wasn't aware of the whole Dylan Dog phenomenon, and I think he was quite charmed and wanted to be involved. They took several stabs at writing it, and one of the approaches they took was to make it a straight giallo thriller with a central mystery about a killer on the loose, and some elements of that remain. But Rupert wasn't interested in that at all. He rejected that. He wanted to make the sort of formless, episodic, surrealist film. So yeah, that's what they ended up with, which structurally is quite odd.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm glad you mentioned that it was episodic, because watching it last night and just spending a lot of time working on movies these days and being immersed in structure, I was kind of blown away by how structureless it was, and it seems to move through these different chapters, all that affect, the caretaker at the cemetery, and the who's Rupert Everett's character, and the zombie apocalypse that is sort of brewing, but seems kind of to be only his problem in some way or another. But
yeah, I mean, there are various threads to pull at here. Probably the most structurally interesting thing is the love story, because I'm not sure if it's meant to be the same woman that he is meeting over and over again. I mean, it kind of put me in mind of Anomalisa, this sort of delusion that all of the characters that you're meeting are the same person. One critic that I read even suggested that it was a reflection on the central character's misogyny, that all women are the same and they're all heartbreakers.
Oh, okay, all right.
it's definitely like the sexual politics of it certainly feel from a different era, and it's a touch male gazy in that sense. But the effect from the central character, from the caretaker, Francesco Della Morte's like own kind of torment, wrestling with love, just the stylistic effect of every time he falls in love being played by the same actress. It's often revealed very cleverly that she's back. And the impact of that is quite startling, just in the experience of watching it. It's a good kind of stylistic maneuver. I mean, I think there's one moment where he meets two college girls who are trying to get a ride from him, and he's distraught and uninterested. And he's talking to the one girl, and you can tell there's another girl standing behind her, and then her hand falls on her shoulder and draws the attention of your eye, and it pans up or tilts up, and you discover Anna Falchi, who is the actress, playing his repeated lover again, and it's always a bit haunting, those moments. And I thought that held up in really interesting ways.
I mean, I think it helps that they chose her as well, because she's just a visually stunning actress and the most amazing eyes and really pouty lips. But yeah, every time she appears, she has this very noticeable presence.
Yeah, she does. And it has to be said that Rupert is not exactly uneasy on the eye. He's in good form in this. And the thing that I found quite startling is that we do get some full frontal male nudity in this movie from Rupert.
Ah, it could have been your cut because I don't think I saw the full frontal nudity in my version. So
Maybe my HD version of it was matted incorrectly. But there is a moment where he picks up Anna Falke in his arms and stands up naked, and yeah,
oh,
there's a whole lot of Rupert on display.
right.
I love that there's several kind of they almost feel like macabre romance novel, almost softcore sex scenes in graveyards, surrounded by some of the just really dark and creepy detritus, but it has a look and feel all its own. Like there's a very pulpy quality to it. But it's interesting because those, the nature of just those kinds of extended, indulgent kind of lurid sex scenes are really something also from a different era. Like you just don't see this in movies and television very much anymore.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to see a woman who is immediately excited at the mention of and becomes sexually aroused by an ossuary.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think her quote is when they enter the ossuary, she says, "I have never seen anything so exciting." And then Francesco just replies, "Neither have I," as they enter this decrepit, flooded ossuary full of rotting corpses and
And bones.
Yeah.
And it's a real one as well. They're actually filming in a real ossuary, and she takes her shoes off and immediately starts wading into it. I thought, well, this is different for a first date, okay?
Yes. And then they proceed to make love on her dead husband's gravestone. So yeah.
Which he doesn't take very kindly to, it has to be said.
No.
There's an underlying theme of sex and death in here. And again, we were talking about Vertigo when we were discussing The Vanishing a couple of episodes ago. And there is quite a strong visual reference to Vertigo here again, because you have the scene where the lovers are kissing and they are standing on a platform that's rotating with the camera. So the background behind them is just sort of swirling around.
Yeah, it's a very dizzying scene as well.
It is.
Just stop.
Yeah, and noticeably, the second time it happens, the version of Anna Falke there, or she, as she's credited, actually gets off the ride. She actually steps off and rejects him, because although she was afraid of penises originally, she has since been raped and gotten over her fear of penises and is quite happy to marry the mayor. Is it the mayor that she's going to marry?
Yeah, so that was a very odd scene. I mean, they were in love, completely inexplicably, and then she admits to being afraid of penises, and then he proceeds to try to get castrated, I guess. And then she decides that she's cured because she's been raped, and now she loves the penis.
Yeah.
I didn't know, and there was such a fascinating subplot with him where everyone in the town thought of him as being impotent.
Yeah.
But apparently it was a lie. And it's strange because, his character is so indifferent to the sort of the trials of life and death, but he's got a certain ego about this. Like the things that he really cares about are kind of love, and at times it almost seems like his and Nagi and his friendship with Nagi and whatnot, and the impotence thing is like it's one of the only values that he has, is he seems really resistant to the idea that that's the case. And then to your point, she comes back and is like, that's the only way I can love a man. And he's just ready to do it. And there's this high comedy scene where he goes into the doctor's office and says, I want to take it off.
Yes.
And the doctor says, are you sure? Are you out of your mind? He's like, yes, get rid of it. Do it now. And and then they get rolled into this surgery chamber. And it's like, wide angle lenses and giant pairs of scissors. And it's like something, straight out of a Terry Gilliam movie, and just so over the top. And I guess he ends up settling for kind of a temporary chemical castration at that point. But Yeah, it's really, I don't know what to do with much of that, except that maybe it has something to do with, I don't know, sacrifice, or again, something to do with the male ego. I didn't really know the sexual undercurrents of it got into such bizarre territories at that part of the movie. I was a little lost, but generally fascinated and bewildered as I remain with this movie. Yeah.
My interpretation of the movie, which I tend to put on a lot of movies, is he dead? Is this some sort of limbo hell torture world that he's going through, where he has to continually fall in love and for his love to die over and over and over again, and then when he tries to leave the world, it's just a cliff to the abyss, to nowhere? I don't know. It just got more and more confusing as the film got on, and then the credits rolled, and I was just really confused.
No, there is a lot going on in this movie in terms of them existing in very contained spaces. There is the contained world of the cemetery where people keep coming back to life, and Francesco has this job of, well, self-appointed job. No, he's being paid for it, isn't he? Actually, yeah, he's being paid to shoot people that have returned, as he calls it. And that's contrasted with the world outside the town, which is just a parody of Italian corrupt small town life. And just a ridiculous, pointless bureaucracy as well. He has a best friend who works in an office that just seems to be surrounded by piles and piles of paper and forms, and it all seems to be pointless. And there's a chief of police who refuses to recognize that Della Morte is probably the guy that's randomly killing people, even though it's blatantly obvious in many, many scenes. And just visually, apart from the snow globe, which you see at the beginning and you see right at the very end, and realize that the two characters in it are actually Francesco and Yagi. You also have the scene in the hospital, the final, very brutal mass murder scene where he's visiting
Franco,
yes, visiting his friend Franco. And he's sort of enclosed. There's this really lovely wide shot looking down on them where they just sort of seem to be enclosed in these hospital screens in the middle of a black space, almost like it's a theatre production, or they're just in an abyss somewhere. So there just seems to be this recurring visual motif of these very confined spaces that everybody appears to be fruitlessly trapped in.
Yeah. What was your take on that, David?
No, I was just thinking as you're saying it, I mean, yeah, drawing all this together actually reminds me of some of the Dollhouse stuff in Hereditary. But yeah, and I think the way you put it, Dan, too, the idea that you're constantly coming back to the idea that it's a visual representation of the fact that he's trapped, but he's also kind of trapped in a cycle of, endlessly falling in love and losing love and sort of lost in the inevitability of death. And it's sort of, if one were to look at him as every man, he's also sort of there to comment on the fact that everyone around him is in the same perilous cycle and just endlessly tormented by love, drawn into it, either death pulls it away from you or the circumstances of life, and then you have to return, because there's all these periphery subplots about people sort of tormented and lost by their love interest. I mean, there's Nagi's, very perverse and weird obsession with the mayor's daughter, which I had totally forgotten about until I saw the movie again. And I was like, oh my God, I totally forgot the other caretaker fishes a dead woman's head out of her grave and makes friends with it. And and then there's that amazing shot where the headless daughter goes after the mayor, and they have like a Bill Plimpton shot where the camera's inside the zombie head's mouth and you can see the teeth coming down over the lens. And I just love it. But then you had the entire subplot with Claudio, who she had a crush on, and then the other, the local Italian woman who loved Claudio, and Claudio, of course, died in the tragic bus accident, and then he was buried on his motorcycle, quite the leather jacket, motorcycle riding kind of beau, and so they buried him with his motorcycle, and of course, when he's reborn, he comes tearing out of the ground, zombie Claudio riding on his motorcycle. A scene I also forgot about, But the local woman is there to greet him and is willing to accept death, and is also tormented in similar fashion. And then you get amazing lines when Francesco discovers them together, where it looks like she's making love with zombie Claudio, but he's actually feeding on her. And she says, "Leave me alone. He's only eating me. I'll be eaten by whoever I want." It's so. Again, I keep thinking how interesting it must be to hear about this movie, having never seen it or seen a trailer. But yeah, I don't know. It's all through the movie, isn't it? Like those same sorts of cycles are being repeated, and when you put it in the context of these kind of containment images, it makes a certain kind of sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's another thing I thought when I was watching the movie was this is an adolescent's dream come true. It's sort of explicit sex and nudity, ridiculous over-the-top gore and zombies. It's hilariously funny, and it's full of existential angst.
Exactly.
Yes.
As a 15, 16, 17-year-old, I would have loved this. I mean, I was listening to the director's commentary, and the director was saying that he views Francesco as an adolescent, as somebody who is an adolescent in a secret garden who is unwilling to leave and face the real world. And what we see of the real world is his ridiculous projected view of it. What we see of women is his ridiculous projection of women. And he's just sort of stewing in his own darkly existential juices and not quite willing to grow up, which is tricky when he's played by a man in his mid-30s. So
Yeah.
It's weird because he's so fashionable too. Like there's such the way he smokes cigarettes, the way he leans into the phone. It's a very punctuated movie rhythmically. So, and maybe that does feed into the adolescence that you're talking about. There is kind of a juvenile sense of cool to him. And he's also, the way he's so detached about the tragedy of life and death, because he's this cemetery caretaker, and part of the comedy comes from the fact that people are constantly coming into the cemetery wailing in anguish at the loss of someone, and he's standing off to the side, having a cigarette, making tiny quips that are actually quite funny. But it's hard to not take his detachment as being pretty clever and cool in a way. But yeah, to your point, there's something kind of inherently juvenile about it.
I've never seen a movie that has portrayed death in such a flippant, carefree way, because people just die all the time. Characters are introduced and immediately killed off, and then killed again by Rupert. And throughout the movie, he kind of cares less and less. And even though his love keeps reappearing, he doesn't care about her in the end. And he ends up killing her by throwing a blanket over a heater. I don't know. I've never felt so unemotional about death before watching a movie.
Well, I think that's one of the curious sort of tonal shifts as you get to the end of it, is that they're not playing the violence for shock anymore. He's shooting people in the hospital, and the whole thing is so matter of fact in the way it's happening. And there's a really sick, twisted sense of humor, particularly when the nurses keep running in and panicking because there's dead people on the floor. He'll make a crack and then shoot somebody. And what's curious about it is what he's distraught about, what he cares about, and what the cinematography and the music and everything else plays as tragic is more the detachment he feels to his old friend, who at that point in the movie is laying on the bed and doesn't seem to remember who he is. Although it seems the guy has stolen his crimes and is at least taking the rap for the murders that he initially was not trying too hard to escape the authorities on that matter, but by the end, Francesco is almost screaming to the cop, I did it and no one will arrest him. But yeah, it's the detachment that he feels with his friend that seems to be the tragedy. That's where you get the arch, the overhead shot looking down on him kind of wailing, and his friend screaming, "Go away." So it's interesting. It's almost like the violence becomes incidental. And we're so used to, I think, through the genre, and often for good reason, needing to, take that subject matter very seriously or always examine the impact of it to some degree. And to see it used in this flippant way has a very curious effect.
Yeah. At the end, the hospital shootings, they almost just seem like punchlines to jokes. But again, it's got a sort of, it has almost got a nasty flavor to it at that point. The film is less funny in its final third.
Yeah.
It's still very dry, but it doesn't seem to be quite as funny. It seems to, the sort of tragedy of the thing seems to really set in at that point.
It's one of those movies where it's just so extreme that the dramatic, serious moments to me were funny unintentionally. So that hospital scene was just hilarious to me because people just kept running in and he just kept shooting them. Or there was that one part where he shoots a nurse and there's blood splatter everywhere, and then the doctor just comes in and says, "What are you doing on the floor, sister?" And then Francesco says she's praying, and then he proceeds to shoot him as well. So it's just, I don't know, I found it hilarious, even though it wasn't supposed to be.
It's an odd combination of comedic styles, isn't it? Because it's halfway between an Italian farce and halfway between a very, very dry English sense of humour. And then Terry Gilliam sort of mixed in there as well. It's on the whole, comedically, I've never seen anything quite like it, I don't think.
I do think that you guys are onto something, though, that I feel like, you know, when I first put the movie back on for the first time, like the first scene is so well orchestrated, you know, and but you're laughing at the zombie horror in a way that you're more comfortable with. And then by the end, it's not that those kind of punctuated, you know, the punchlines, as you put it, Conrad, aren't, you know, they're landing in the same way. And I'm often laughing, but I'm also shaking my head and far more uncomfortable in the latter half of the film. And there's this really pervasive sense of isolation that starts to set in throughout the movie. It's also got a pretty decent runtime, you know, so by the time you're getting there in this kind of amorphous, episodic, plotless kind of movie, you don't know where you are, and the reality that he's in and you're in has broken down quite a bit. And I really do feel myself, you know, I was watching, I really did feel myself kind of grasping for something that wasn't there. You know, and sometimes in movies like this, I find that it's just a sense of order. Like I'm sort of lost with everything that's been put on the table, and that becomes, you know, deeply unsettling. And so I did find myself oddly emotionally connected at the very end to when he kind of loses Nagi for a second. And, you know, very overtly is saying, "You were my only friend." And just the idea of being left only with Nagi, which is kind of where he started. Just, it does have a very isolating, you know, resonance by the end of it that I found palpable.
Yeah, I completely agree with the isolation aspect because Francesco, he does get gradually just not care as much about death, about killing people, and he's so casual about it. And it's almost that sense of no matter what he does, no one gives a shit, kind of like he's almost, he wants the attention, he wants to be locked up, but no one's blaming him, no one's accusing him of any crimes, and he still gets away with everything that he does.
Yeah, so it's almost nihilistic at the end, isn't it? It's nothing matters. There's a real bitter taste to it, I think, towards the end, that I think is very different from the beginning when you're just reveling in the zombie mayhem. Obviously, the big difference is he's shooting the living towards the end. Yeah, so that there is that tonal shift.
So the movie does have such a mixture of tones. So it is comedic and serious, but there are a lot of very poetic scenes as well. Like some of the scenes in the graveyard when he's making love to the she character, and it's just beautifully lit, and there's silk and wind machines and all sorts of stuff, and it's very art house, but then it's followed by a bunch of zombies and terrible prosthetics being shot.
Yeah, and all of these effects are all practical as well,
Yes.
which is quite nice because this is 1994, so I guess there weren't many other options. But I do love the sort of blue fireflies. I'm not sure what they're supposed to be. Yeah, loads of them being choreographed on wires during the sex scene, and it's kind of magical in a very simple way.
It's charming, yes.
Yeah, it's charming. Like there's an initial resistance to it because it's kind of hokey, but then, you know, the actors are both, the tone of the performances I find are both, there is a wink to it, you know, I mean, they're certainly in on the joke, but they're not, it's not high camp necessarily. Like they are certainly diving into the themes, and they're playing the emotion with a certain sense of melodrama. And so I find myself watching it kind of always wrestling between, being detached and kind of laughing at it like I'm on the outside, and I'm sort of appreciating the artifice of it, and getting drawn into the weird sincerity of it in moments. Like it has that kind of garish, over the top kind of vibe, and the way they're going for this stuff and talking in these big, broad, thematic ways, about love and death. And there's all these kind of poetic asides, towards these topics that would be completely silly in any other context. But again, it's just something so weirdly sincere about it that I'm kind of charmed into it in a sense. But and another thing, just along, talking about the artfulness of it in general, is it's really, I find myself excited watching it just, by the way the cinema is utilized throughout. Like there's so many different incredible cinematic techniques, and the director has so much fun getting us in and out of scenes. And, we talked about swirling cameras around two people making out when you want an over-the-top sense of romance, and the feeling of swirling in a kiss. But there are just a million of these mechanics employed, throughout the movie that I think sometimes in modern filmmaking are seen as a little bit gimmicky. And we've kind of gotten away from that kind of playfulness. And so just from a craft perspective, I find myself looking at this and just going, there's got to be, it's good to look back on this stuff and look at these kinds of filmmaker moves and just think of how do they incorporate in the modern era, where I think we just not as bold and descriptive with the camera as he allowed himself to be.
One thing that it did remind me of was Sam Raimi's work in something like Evil Dead 2, particularly the scene with the head launching itself across the room and getting a shot from inside the mouth as the teeth are gnashing. It's classic, ridiculous Raimi stuff. And all of those shots where they're using something called an Innovision probe lens. So the opening shot starts inside a skull and pulls out of it to reveal the main character. And there's another scene where the camera retreats inside Miyagi's busted television, and you have the shards and flames around the edges of the frame. So there are these sort of Sam Raimi-esque flamboyant camera moves, very inventive camera moves. And there are also these great static, beautifully framed shots, like all the shots that are in the graves looking up at the sky with these cypresses looking like denuded fangs sort of surrounding the edge of the grave, and the mourners surrounding, looking down at them. There are some really beautiful shots in there that you feel were inspired by the original comics, the Dylan Dog comic strips, although I've never seen them. So it's sort of a combination of really beautiful flowing camera movement and jokey camera movement, and also just beautifully framed shots. So visually, it's quite the feast to look at as well.
Yeah, that scene, that opening scene, it almost looked animated. Like it almost looked like it was stop motion or something. It was quite strange to look at. I think one thing that does kind of it lets the film down, but at the same time it is charming, was the effects and the set design. I mean, it looked great, but every gravestone kind of looked like you could just push it over with a gentle nudge. Kind of similar to Plan 9 from Outer Space or something. If you just jumped on the ground, everything would just topple over. Another effect that was hilarious was the fly that is buzzing around the she character's corpse. And it's obviously just a black dot on a string that they're just kind of waving around. And you can see the string as well. Same with those the little flaming lights that you mentioned, Conrad. I just saw them as flaming marshmallows that just put on pieces of wire, and they were just kind of prodding around. It was pretty hilarious.
About the joke during the bus accident. So the bus goes off the road, and he's got quite a bit of spectacle. So initially the bus hits a bunch of bikers. This is in the Claudio death scene where they're all coming around the side of the mountain.
Yes.
And the mayor's daughter. And so there's a sort of large grisly pile up where they did a good bit of coverage and used some kind of old-fashioned cinematic techniques. But then the bus apparently drives off the side of the mountain. Right where they got to the edge of their budget, he just cuts to a horse.
Oh.
And you see the horse play a reaction to the sound of a bus landing at the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah.
I cackled out loud at that one.
So what did we think of the score by Manuel de Sica?
The score was interesting. It was very synthetic and a lot of fake orchestra sounds in there. A bit hokey, but I kind of think it added to it. It kind of emphasized the scenes even more.
I think the main theme's quite memorable.
I think so.
Also,
yeah.
Again, this being a movie I had seen many times in the past, like it was, that stuck with me note for note. Like, and it was, I love the playfulness, and it's pretty twisted. It's also used very well in the scenes. I think he orchestrates revelation really well. Again, this is a movie where you're constantly looking to find the point and the meaning of it. And so you're sort of, you're out to sea as an audience member. And so sometimes when he drops in that central melody and it's working alongside, an inventive camera move, you get the sense that we're coming to the point, that something's going to be summarized here. And oftentimes it is and it isn't. But I find it was very playfully orchestrated, and it's kind of always taking you in new directions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the kind of synthesizer score that I've never been all that fond of. So I prefer the classic late 70s, 80s era synthesizer score where synths sounded like synths, analog synths. So John Carpenter, Tangerine Dream, that it creates an aesthetic all of its own. This is more from the mid-90s period where there was a shift towards sampling acoustic instruments, sampling orchestras, and trying to sound as though it's an orchestral score when it really isn't. So to me, it just comes across as a little bit cheap, sort of like a cable TV movie from the mid-90s.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't really process the samples so much. Like, compare it to the film Razorback that we covered in a previous episode, which is very, very, it's drenched in reverb and delay and all sorts of effects. Whereas this was almost quite dry and it just sounded straight from the box kind of thing. And there's even one scene where the Nagi character is playing, I don't even know what instrument that is. It just looks like a piece of wood that he's bowing. But it just sounds like a synth keyboard that he's playing.
Yeah, it does. But goodness only knows what the actual sound was that he was producing on set.
Probably nothing.
Probably nothing, no.
Now it's time for Random Trivia.
Dan, it's over to you for some amazing trivia. What have you got for us this time?
So this movie was very arty, a lot of visually stunning scenes. So one of the scenes is when Francesco and the love interest are kissing in the crypt, and she says, no, not like this, and she puts a shroud over his face, and she's also got a veil over hers, and then they kiss that way. Apparently that shot has a direct influence from a painting by Rene Magritte. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, I think it's just Magritte.
Rene Magritte. I think he's a French painter. Anyway, there's a painting of his called The Lovers, which has two lovers with shrouds over their heads kissing. So nice little art reference there for art historians out there.
Yeah, always good to quote the classics.
Yes.
And that's our trivia moment.
Yes. In terms of the sound, I guess we have to mention that this is a very Italian production in terms of all the sound was recorded in post. So all the dialogue, it seems, although some of the scenes, the dialogue did sound like it was on location, but
Yeah, it did.
90% of it was done with dubbing later on, and they didn't process it to make it sound like it was outside or inside. It just all sounded the same, and people sounded close no matter how far away from the camera they were. That was pretty funny.
Yeah, that's something about Italian films that always makes me feel as though they feel really sort of hyper real because all of the voices are recorded after the fact.
Yes.
And there's no attempt to try and make it sound real in any way. It's sort of, makes it very hyper real.
Yeah.
I always wonder if the effect of that, style is often born from some kind of utility. So who knows if it's budgetary or if it's, just speaking to the technology of an era. Again, this was 94, so it wasn't that long ago. But did it become fashionable to treat things in certain ways? I always think about little details like the sound of the gun. The gunshot is a very specific sound that's repeated endlessly throughout the movie, and oftentimes it feels like it's the same sample repeated over and over again. So it sounds the same, whether, to your point, whether he's in the house or he's out in the graveyard or he's in a hospital. And it's not trying to immerse you in the realism of anything, but it does kind of lean towards this. At times it has like a slight slapstick kind of cartoon quality to it. Because everything's mixed down in that fashion. And, maybe it's just looking back on it from this vantage point and kind of fetishizing that aesthetic a bit. Like I kind of loved it, but in the way that you love cinematic artifacts in a sense.
Yeah. I think with these Italian giallo films, it does create a sense of another world, like a world that you wouldn't normally see in cinema, in Hollywood cinema, where, I mean, it often is all in post as well, but it's all very perfectly polished and mixed in. But with this, it almost seems quite awkward sometimes, some of the scenes, because there's not enough sound. They would be walking along and you wouldn't hear the footsteps, or he would slap the table and you wouldn't hear a sound or something like that. So it does kind of project you into this other world that isn't really reality.
Yeah, and it inadvertently plays into the theme of the film, maybe, that they are in this enclosed alternative space, although I'm sure that wasn't what was intended. It's interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, David, it could be one of these artifacts that was just a utilitarian matter of fact when the film was made, that somebody at some point is going to slavishly reproduce artificially at some point, in the same way that Tarantino did Grindhouse and what was that movie recently where they made it look as though it was filmed in the 70s, even to the point where they had cigarette burns in the corner?
Ouija,
Origin of Evil, yeah. Yeah, it's a sort of thing that it's like we've spent all this time sort of advancing recording techniques to the point where you've gotten rid of the vinyl cracks and the tape hiss, and now everybody is artificially putting in vinyl crackle and tape hiss. It's really funny how these things go in cycles. So I wonder if at some point somebody will try to recreate a giallo movie with bad Foley.
Yeah.
I think too, sometimes it's completely, it's not even a conscious decision, because so much of the movie process happens quickly and on the fly, and you have to find your way through that. And you sit in an audio mix and somebody, you're dialing in the reverb quality of a piece of audio. And in my experience, it's just 3 or 4 people in a room in the final mix and somebody going, that sounds good. Like, I don't know why, but that sounds good. I like it when it's brighter or bolder, or somebody may say, no, it sounds like they're right in front of us and they're in the back other room. And I want to feel like I'm where the camera is in some sort of realistic fashion. All the variance between those decisions is very intuitive. And so I think it's worth saying, I think sometimes those emulations aren't even conscious. It's just a reflection of the things that we've loved. But I always like looking at it that way, because it's useful to think that that realism doesn't really exist and that everything is a stylistic choice. Whether it's harking back to another era or not, it all is a communication device about something. Because the second you work with an audio mix, you usually start with way too much sound. And so you're trying to reproduce all the sounds in a living room. Well, that doesn't sound good in a movie. So you have to reduce it to essential elements. And to your point, Dan, with this, it gets reduced sometimes to only the things that punctuate the visual beats. And that has a certain flavor to it and adds to that kind of symphonic cartoon, roller coaster ride that you're on. I've used words like slapstick today. Like, I feel like it leans into that in a similar fashion. But Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, I think, because I am a sound designer, so I think people forget that cinema sound isn't reality, that, punches don't sound like that in real life, or footsteps aren't as audible in real life. So I think people have a expectation to what they think a movie should sound like. And because Jello movies don't sound like that, it sounds strange. It doesn't sound real. But even though movie sound isn't real as well, because most of it is done in post. Yeah, I think people forget that movies aren't real.
As a designer, do you find a lot of variance in people's tastes and flavors for simple things?
Yes. I've worked with directors that don't want anything jarring. So everything is very smoothed out, and cuts are very smoothed out in terms of audio fading in and out. I've worked with directors that are very influenced by Quentin Tarantino, he loves big sound and everything to be way bigger sounding than they should be, and gritty. And so, yeah, it depends on the director, and they will have their say every time, and it's always different. In The Ritual, sound, I felt, was a very important part.
We had a great team in The Ritual. I learned a lot from watching our design team, and then assimilating, the team of designers. We had a really great Foley team as well. Some of the densest, most articulate, detailed Foley work I'd ever seen.
Yes.
And but bringing them together with the mixer and our composer, who is someone that I've been working with for a long time, and assembling everybody in a room was fun. It was a great collaboration. But I always find, again, and maybe movies are done in quicker time frames now. Maybe this is just the way of the world. I like to imagine back in the day, people had a little bit more space to breathe and kind of make stylistic decisions. I mean, in my opinion, in my experience, it is often such a tight window. You're just trying to survive it and get it done and get it up to a certain measure of quality. And that's why it always becomes completely intuitive. Oftentimes the movie this is what you could get away with given the circumstances in a certain amount of time. And whatever stylistic flourishes exist up there are often a fragment of what you hope to achieve. And by the time you're done, you're just eager to show the movie to people and see what remains, what still comes across here. How close did we get, because you've lost perspective on it, which to bring it back to something like Cemetery Man is why I have such an appreciation looking at this movie again and just realizing how, whether it holds up for us or not, and to whatever degree, I just found that it was incredibly artfully executed on almost every level. Like there were a lot of decisions and choices being made as far as how the beats would be rendered and articulated. And I found myself as an independent filmmaker, often without a lot of money, and either helping on films or my own films, getting tossed in the situation, and you're just trying to cover it in a way to make the day. So, something like this is just chock full of meaning. Every scene's opening on an interesting image. There's tons of flourish, between the scenes. The camera's always moving. There's a lot of orchestration within the images. So I just have such appreciation for it, because all that takes time and energy and planning and, resources you sometimes don't have.
Yes.
Coming to you live from the Movie Oubliette Theatre, it's the prestigious Mobley Awards.
Yes, it's that time where we nominate some of our favourite aspects of the movie in a bunch of categories that are entirely useless. Kicking off, as we always do, with our favourite quote from the movie. The film is so beautifully written. I'm fairly certain that everybody will have multiple nominations for this. My personal favourite is one of Francesco's many ruminations on life and death. He says, "At a certain point in life, you realise you know more dead people than living," which is a very glass half empty kind of statement. It reminded me of Arthur C. Clarke's foreword to 2001, where he said, "Behind every man now alive stands 30 ghosts, for that is the ratio by which the dead outnumber the living." So, yeah, that was my favourite glasses half empty quote from Francesco. Any other nominations?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say, as a general appreciation of the dialogue, I mean, again, watching it last night, there's so many little exchanges that can only exist in a movie like this that I find myself just laughing at the style of, but just appreciating the gusto to kind of go for it. When he picks up the two young college women and he's sitting in the car and they're trying to invite him in. Anna Fauci comes in and leans against the window and she says to him, he's reluctant to go in, and she says to him, "Make a wish." And he lights a cigarette and he says, "I want you to fall in love with me." And then she leans in and lights her cigarette off of his flame and says, "But I'm already in love with you."
Yes.
You know, and like, it's again, I always find myself laughing in those moments, but they really kind of swing for it. And there's a certain wink to it that's kind of a blast.
Yeah.
I think there must be 100 moments like that in the movie, just strange little punctuated exchanges that feel lost to me in movies these days. I think we just speak in a different language now.
Yeah, none of the dialogue in this movie, you would say, is something that normal human beings would say to each other.
No.
Absolutely.
Because none of these situations happen to normal people.
Well, no, this is true. Well, hopefully not. Dan, what was your favourite quote?
So my favorite quote was the very poetic final scene where they've reached the end of the world, as it seems, and he's just sitting on the cliff. And Nagi has died, I guess. And so Francesco says, "Death, death, death comes sweeping down, filthy death, the leering clown, death on wings, death by surprise, failing evil from worldly eyes, death that spawns as life succumbs, while death and love, two kindred drums, keep the time till judgment day, an actor in a passion play, without beginning, without end, evermore. Amen." And yeah, very Shakespearean soliloquy almost there.
And again, not the kind of thing that you would just roll off the tongue in an everyday situation. Okay, our next category would be, and we changed the decade by movie, our next category is, what's the most 90s thing about this movie? David, would you like to go first? Is there something in here that just screams 90s to you?
I mean, I feel like this is a movie harkening back to a different era.
I agree.
Yeah, I honestly have a hard time zeroing in on the 90s anyway. Maybe it's because I was a kid and could barely see the forest through the trees anyhow. But to me, that's a less describable decade than the 80s or even the aughts in some ways. But and in cinema, I guess I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
No, I'm really pleased to hear you say that, because this is a pet theory of mine that every other decade that you name, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, gives you you get really strong visual images in terms of fashion, architecture, art, movies, music. And if you say 90s, for me, it's a barren wasteland of nothing particularly memorable.
And I will always disagree.
You do, because you were a child of the 90s.
Yes,
so.
What I've written down as the most 90s part of this movie was just Rupert Everett was the most 90s. Because he plays this very kind of Hugh Grant character. He's charming and a little bit carefree and has messy hair and upturned eyebrows, always looks worried. But yeah, Rupert Everett, the most 90s part of this movie.
Good answer.
For me, it was Rupert's big shirt.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just this idea of wearing this voluminous shirt that's at least 8 sizes too big when you're cut like he is underneath it. It's a very big shirt he's wearing, and he's wearing the same one throughout the entire movie as well, which is quite something. Best hair or costume?
I would say Claudio's motorcycle riding zombie get-up is probably worth mentioning.
He was pretty badass, yeah.
It's pretty badass. It's totally over the top and has a couple oddly haunting beats. Because some of the zombies in the movie speak, and Claudio Zombie doesn't speak. He just kind of stares down at his former lover with a grin while revving the engine of his motorcycle. But yeah, I would say the fact that he's still got bus parts in his head. Maybe we can call that wardrobe for the sake of this podcast and say that would be my answer.
Okay, so favorite scene.
I really loved the severed head scene. So Valentina's severed head is inside the TV as Nagi is talking to her. And then her father, the mayor, walks in and she flies across the room, as you mentioned, David. The camera inside her mouth proceeds to bite the mayor's neck. And just a ridiculous and unpredictable and completely out of the blue, crazy, insane scene there. I loved it.
Yeah, it's the same one that I was thinking of as well. It kind of stands apart from the rest of the movie, I think.
Yes. So, David.
I've got one. Yeah, so this is a tiny little, like a very specific little beat, but I was talking earlier about just appreciating the way the director handled the revelations. It's a scene in the middle of the movie where he meets Anna Falke's character for the second time. She's already died, he thought, come back and he shot her, and he believes that he killed her upon her resurrection, her reanimation. It's just a very artful sequence where he's lured out to the graveyard, and the opening image is an image of the planet Earth in statue on top of one of the tombstones, and behind it is the reflection of the moon in one of the small cemetery ponds. And so it starts like this kind of cosmic reference and racking from the moon to Earth, and you don't know what you're looking at, and the camera pulls back, and you realize this is just a little tableau in the graveyard, and we reveal Francesco coming and walking in. And they really enjoy the build, and it's one of those moments where the music and the camera work quite well as he slowly comes to realize that there's a presence next to him and that it's her upon return. And when she's finally revealed, they just completely swing for the fences, and she's standing there, arms craned up with her rags kind of blowing in the wind, and she's backlit. And she comes to him, and they instantly begin to make out. They are instantly drawn into their love for one another, and then of course she bites him. And the whole thing's a bit arch and goofy in all the right ways, but I just think it's a wonderfully orchestrated bit.
Yeah. Moving on to our next category. Is there a most cliched horror or fantasy, maybe, moment in this movie? For me, I always fall back on the obligatory thunderstorm. And of course, in this case, the thunderstorm happens during the melodramatic "I want you to cut off my penis" scene.
Oh, yeah.
So it's almost like a mad professor resurrecting Frankenstein's monster or something. Yeah.
There's also a big needle in there as well.
Very, very large needle. I'm not entirely sure what it's really for. Horses, I would think. David, how about you? Did you have a cliched horror moment in this?
I have to say, I feel like I've been so immersed in things of a more refined taste of late that all the kitschy, gimmicky horror beats felt quite refreshing,
Oh, yes.
In this October that is 2018, for me to watch this movie for the first time in a long time, I just had a particular affinity for all of them. I mean, there's many that have been done 1,000 times, and we've found better ways to do them. But I just thought that, embracing the material of that stuff was frankly educational for me. So I celebrated in full, but I may feel differently on another watch.
And our final category, funniest scene, either advertently or inadvertently. My nomination for this would actually be the Boy Scouts with the clacking teeth attacking Francesco when he's fresh out of the shower, and Yagi's just trying to have his dinner and watch War Blob on TV. Whatever that is. Dan, how about you?
I've actually already mentioned it. So the hospital scene where people just keep running in and he keeps just shooting them one by one. And I know, David, you mentioned how you like the part where it kind of pans up and it shows this hospital operating theater that just seems to be in the middle of nothing. But I found it really funny because his friend Franco just yells out, "Go away!" and it just pans up and there's this dramatic music, and it reminded me of one of the Star Wars prequels where it has this big pan shot out and Darth Vader's just saying no.
Oh God, yeah. And Lucas even ruined Return of the Jedi with that thing as well. It's such a shame because David Prowse does such a fantastic bit of physical acting in Return of the Jedi, where he's looking down at his son and he's looking up at the Emperor, and the way they've lit the mask, it looks very different from the one aspect to the other. It goes from sympathy to anger just because of the way it's highlighting the grills on the mouth, and it's so well done. And but for some reason they've decided on the current version that we're all subjected to that we needed to have Vader saying no as well. Terrible. But yeah, let's not go down that rabbit hole. David, how about you for funniest scene?
I don't have a specific scene so much as to say that I laughed a lot throughout the movie at the way Rupert Everett plays the indifference to death and the tragedy of death. And it's a really nuanced thing, and I think, Conrad, to your point, it speaks to the kind of the dry British humor of it, and he's just always kind of making small quips and asides, on what's happening. And there's one little moment that I cannot describe in a way that will do it any justice. It was after he accidentally shoots the Italian lover of Claudio, and he's been shooting the dead, and this is the first time we realize that he's crossed that threshold, and he's initially stunned, and you almost expect the movie to enjoy a register change on this. And moments later, he's reburying Claudio, and he throws her in there and, finishes the last scoop of dirt and lights a cigarette, and he goes, well, at least they get to be together forever. And Noggy is kind of distraught, and Everett looks over at him, and there's just a beat, and he kind of shrugs. He's like, "Buh." What? He kind of mocks Noggy's pain in this moment. Is like, what are you going to do? And goes back to the house. And it's moments like that, or when the mayor freaks out when he sees the headless corpse of his daughter, where he'll just set aside, he just say, plot thickens. And it really works. And it's a testament to Everett's performance throughout. But I think it's all through the movie and goes to in weird places.
Yeah, it's marvelous. So that's our Mooblies.
Yes.
Right, it's final verdict time, and now we have to decide whether this returnee from the other side should be shot in the head and dismissed with a blunt quip, or whether it deserves to be left to roam free and to chomp on its own father. Dan, what did you make of this movie, and do you think it should be saved?
I mean, I'm in really two minds, because I love movies like this that I know are terrible. I mean, the production and everything, acting, the dubbing, the music, everything is terrible, but I loved it at the same time. I had a blast watching it. I laughed almost every minute. Rupert Everett was standout amazing. And I like watching movies that don't really make any sense, that make you go, what did I just watch? So, I mean, my serious film critic mind would say, yes, just throw it back into the hole. But my enjoying B-grade horror comedies would say, yeah, set it free. I don't know. I'm torn. How about you, David?
I mean, I had a blast watching this again. I mean, I think it's such an interesting time in horror, and people are taking risks they haven't taken before. But there is a deficit right now of kind of classic horror comedy. Like, at least tonally in the States, I don't feel like we know how to manage that the same way we used to. And the ability to be kind of flip about serious subjects does capture a certain nihilism or malaise, which I do think is present in kind of the current moment in the world. And so it has a place for me in that regard. Some of it doesn't age well. I think, we've had some conversations today about the, kind of some of the adolescent sensibilities, and then some of the sexual politics will look differently to us now looking back. I think also, the flip nature of the mass violence. I mean, when we were watching this, for me in 1997 in college or something, it's like it had a different meaning. You could do that and it simply be representative of something. Now you have somebody running around, shooting live people in a public place, and it calls to mind a whole new host of images. And so there's a certain innocence about it that I think, looking at it in the context in which it existed, I think you can have a certain appreciation for it that maybe, again, would look different in today's terms. But I love it. I have an affinity for what it's trying to do, the bug nuts nature of it. I think this kind of material would inspire new filmmakers to do different things in different directions that maybe they're not expecting. And I found it really refreshing. Yeah. Please release it. Please allow it to exist. Yeah.
Well, for my part, I thought that it was quite a revelation. I love discovering movies like this that I have never heard of before, because as you go on in years, the opportunity to discover something from the 80s or 90s that you haven't heard of or seen before, it becomes increasingly rare. And this one really was a treat. I think there are numerous things. It's just so artfully produced. It's such a visual feast. In terms of its writing, it's so beautifully written in a way that you very rarely see now. You never hear people delivering dialogue that is as thoughtfully constructed as this, even if it does have the sensibility of a teenager going through his goth poetry phase. But it's just such a rare thing, and also it's just so absolutely batshit crazy, plotless, episodic, and rambling, but has this strange sort of rhyming structure to it from the beginning to the end, and a real sense of development and pathos and connection to these two characters that are going through these experiences, that it still kind of works. It doesn't sort of completely alienate its audience. You do get drawn into it. So I think it's a really unique film. It's quite the gem, and I do wish that more people had come across it. Even though, yes, it hasn't aged well in some aspects, but I still think the people who love this type of movie will get a real kick out of seeing it if they've never come across it before. So I think more people should see it, and I would vote for it being released into the wild.
Awesome.
All right. Be gone.
Be gone.
The rest of the world looks like Yagi.
Escape the cemetery.
So the question now is, what movie will we be taking a look at next time?
Well, I thought it's a while since we did some fantasy. We haven't done anything like that since Willow. So I thought we would throw ourselves back into 13th century Europe and see the magic that is Lady Hawk.
Oh, I've heard so much about this movie and I've never actually seen it.
It's got such an amazing pedigree. I mean, it stars Matthew Broderick, Rutger Hauer, and Michelle Pfeiffer. It's directed by Richard Donner, the man behind Superman and The Omen. Yeah, so by all accounts, it should be an absolute classic.
Yeah.
I've seen it once, but not since, so
Okay.
it should be. And you haven't seen it.
No, can't wait to
yeah.
check it out. It sounds amazing.
It's an interesting one.
Well, thanks a lot, David, for joining us on this journey through the cemetery. It's been an absolute joy having you on.
Thank you so much, guys. I mean, this is a blast and has been amazingly refreshing. And I've enjoyed diving in with you guys in all ways that is Cemetery Man. So it's been fantastic. Thank you.
So if people want to follow your exploits, how would they do so?
I'm on Twitter under Bruck Machina. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And what are you working on next? Is there anything you can tell us about? I read online that you're working on a movie written by the authors of Super Dark Times, which was a film I watched very recently and really enjoyed. So I was excited about that.
Oh, they will be happy to hear that. Yeah, Ben Collins and Luke Petrowski, amazing writing team. They actually adapted my VHS short into a feature for Chiller Network called Siren, and then Super Dark Times is a fantastic movie, and they have a lot of great scripts. And The Night House is a very, very, it's kind of a creepy riff on Haunt, about a woman who 8 days after her husband's unexpected suicide is visited by an entity that may or may not be him. And But it's deeply original, and it's a movie that we're fighting very hard to get made, and we think a lot of great people have gotten behind it. So I'm very optimistic we will be shooting it very soon, and my hope is that will be the next one. But there's many things in the works. Thank you for asking.
Also, listeners, please do watch The Ritual, which is currently streaming on Netflix. It's amazing.
It is, yeah. It's a fantastic film. I really enjoyed it. It's a British horror movie. I think it would be fair to say. I don't know if it was funded as such, but it's certainly a British cast. Who was the lead actor?
Rafe Spall, Rafe Spall, and it was produced by the Imaginarium, which is Andy Serkis's production company based out of London.
Right.
It's a full-blooded British film. I was a guest American director, which was an interesting journey. But it's on Netflix, and I don't know if it's on Netflix in the UK at the moment. I don't know that it is.
It's on Amazon Prime, actually, in the UK, and it's still available, and I do recommend everyone check it out. There are some images in there that haunted me for a long time afterwards. I mean, in particular, I do love the scenes where Rafe Spall's character's trauma sort of bleeds into his current reality.
Oh, yes.
The sight of fluorescent lighting in the middle of a forest is really quite striking. Yeah, it put me in mind of the dream sequences in American Werewolf in London where David Norton comes across his hospital bed in the middle of the forest. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, rare movie where you get to the point where you think, is it just going to be all psychological and you're not going to see the monster? But you do see the monster, and even better, the monster is amazing. Kudos on that one.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. I appreciate that. Also, American Werewolf in London, very much a reference point for us. So.
So please do follow David on Twitter. And if you would like to follow us on our socials, we are everywhere: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as Movie Oubliette. And if you're not sure how to spell oubliette, it is
Oubliette.
Sorry, I'm a bit preoccupied shooting all these zombies. What was that?
Oubliette.
And as always, please give us a rating and review on iTunes or whatever other podcast platform you are using. It really helps us out.
because this ego needs feeding, frankly.
Surely does. Also, our email is movie.oubliette@gmail.com if you want to email us. We always love your comments and suggestions for other movies to take a look at.
Yes, indeed. So thanks for joining us, especially David. Thanks for being here with us to talk about this movie.
Guys, again, thanks so much. This has really been a blast, and I don't know, it's been a really refreshing, take on this, and I really enjoyed how you guys saw the movie and what you brought to it. So I've learned a bit about Cemetery Man through this conversation. So I wish you the best of luck, and thank you. I hope we talk again.
Yes. So that's it for this episode of Movie Oubliette. Please join us next time on another epic journey of discovery.
Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
We review the films others tend to forget. Come with us and open up the movie Juliet.
Go away. I haven't got time for the living.